Welcome to the American BioDefense Institute Forum. Today we will be looking at a new public health model for pandemics. My name is Jeff Pegues. I am the Chief Justice and Homeland Security Correspondent for CBS News. I will be your moderator today, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this program. I'm looking forward to hearing from the panelists on the current state of affairs and, of course, where we go from here. What you will hear are concrete ideas that will help, I think, move this country forward through this pandemic and well into the future. First, we're going to hear from Congressman Paul Gosar. We will also be speaking with Dr. Ravi Starzl, Executive Director of ABI. And finally, we will have a panel taking a look at how the pandemic has influenced various aspects of society, including sports, business, and the law, with Marques Colston, Attorney John Barry, and JiNan Glasgow George. First, though, we're going to hear from Congressman Paul Gosar. Dr. Paul Gosar is serving his fifth term in Congress as the representative from Arizona's 4th Congressional District. He was recognized in 2012 as one of the hardest working and most effective new members of Congress. Before being elected to Congress in 2010, Dr. Gosar owned his own dental practice and was a small businessman in Flagstaff, Arizona for 25 years. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
So tell us, how have you managed through this coronavirus pandemic?
Well, one of our first things, we were one of the first offices to be very nimble, to be working remotely. Everybody in our office is required to go back to the state, to our district, to work on their portfolios that they actually share with stakeholders, people on the ground, and businesses. And so we were very fortunate to be ahead of the curve. And then we started looking at what are the applications of today's issues, whether it be the pandemic, whether it be the platforms, the freedom of speech. We listen to people, what their ideas and solutions are. And then we talk to industry, and we try to come up with some solutions that everybody can bite into and work together on. So it's been something like I practice dentistry. I got to ask people what the problem is, where does it hurt, and then take some diagnostics and put something together and enter into a contract. So we've been very, very fortunate to have great success because we listen to people.
Well, and some of the things that you've tried to do is introduce an amendment focused on pandemic prevention. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So, in the last half of the 20th century, we've depended upon prevention and utilization of massive doses of vaccines. And that's great because it's got a great outcome. But this pandemic has shown us something more of a problem, is that the persistence and the nature of the virus caused a lot of havoc, a lot of hardships. Our economy suffered. And so we needed some type of a fire break so that we could get through this, keeping people back at work and mitigating some of the pandemic's offsets. This is where the passive immunity actually works very, very well. And this is DARPA's P3 area has done very good job in this area. To give you an example, a grant was given to Vanderbilt University to work with AstraZeneca in regards to antibody-related research on COVID-19. So very incredible nuances and startups. The problem for this DARPA program is they're phased out after 5 years. And so what we want to do is make it more permanent so that we have an active strategy when we're presented with an issue with a virus or a bacterium. How do we protect people in the interim, and then how do we get a vaccine, speeding it up?
And so where does the amendment stand in Congress right now?
Well, unfortunately, the Rules Committee didn't make it in order. But we'll be introducing it as a standalone bill. And that's how we get a lot of things done. We start by utilizing it as an amendment. If we can't get the amendment, or even if we get the amendment, we try to go to a full-term bill.
Are you frustrated that enough hasn't been done in terms of putting up defenses against this pandemic?
No, it's frustrating because I think we were caught with our pants down, to be perfectly honest with you. We needed to have done better. We need to look at the wide spectrum of all opportunities, whether they be short-lived pre-medications to the application of how do we get to a vaccine, and then also getting buy-in from the constituents out in the real world. That's the key. And if they feel like they've been included and not forced to do something, I think that's the best way that we can get America to get back on track.
That brings me to my next question. The American BioDefense Institute has taken a perspective that the new public health model for pandemics has to go beyond a pure vaccine strategy, but look at a four-prong approach, educating the public on proactive personal health strategies, looking at development of a rapid response fire break to serve as a preventative solution, rescue drugs for those who are sick, and a vaccine. So what is your perspective on this as both a trained medical professional and as a public servant?
I perfectly agree with that. What we've got to do is we've seen the enemy and now we have to break it down. There's a log of at least a year for our vaccine. So what do we do in the meantime with that fire break? How do we get people to stay at work? How do we protect them for the long aspect? So, that's where this passive immunity actually comes from. What we want to do is we want to have cost-effective opportunities. This is some parts of the discussion about, what interim medications could we use that are applicable, like the steroidal aspects, even the hydroxychloroquine was part of the discussion. But what we found is that we're living in an archaic past, and we have to bring it up to the 21st century. So instead of being reactionary over a 60-day period, we challenge, and this is based off of the Biodefense's memo to the Department of Health and Human Services, to get down to 28 days where we have a fire break and having an interceptive type of response to whether it be a pandemic or a national emergency. And I think this makes a lot of sense. And once again, you want to challenge that ingenuity of the American people and the American institutions, because that's how you get that entrepreneurship to really ascend to accomplishing it.
As we have this discussion, Arizona has really been in the news lately with a sharp rise in coronavirus cases there. What message do you have for the people of your home state as they manage through this pandemic?
Well, the biggest thing is I've told people this is an opportunity for us to invest in ourselves. Eat well, sleep well, take care of yourself. Get outside. The UV light definitely helps you engage in this. Make sure you got good vitamin D. Expose your belly. Some of us may not want to do that, but expose your belly to get that vitamin D that really helps your immune system. And then to explain to them, it's not about if you're going to encounter this virus, it's when. And your body wants to take it when you're very healthy. And so you want to engage in that aspect. But, we're going to be a stronger country for enduring this. And we're going to see a lot of processes change. And in Arizona, we've always been the kind of rebellious bunch. We should be part of the leadership instead of the followers. And so thank you. Stay healthy, invest in yourself, and we will get through this.
Well, and you talk about the fabric of Arizonans, and I'm just wondering, what do you do to stay safe through this pandemic? Are you wearing a mask? What kind of other precautions are you taking?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we go into a business that they require masks, we'll wear a mask. Most of the time, we're outdoors, and so I don't see the real benefit of a mask outdoors. Particularly with the UV sensitivity of this virus. So from that standpoint, I try to use personal distancing, and I think everybody tries to look at that. I wash my hands. Being a previous dentist, I'm methodical about washing your hands. It's amazing how many things are conveyed through your handshakes and whatnot. But from that standpoint, we try to use good personal protocols and teach that. You know, I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and you walk a mile in my moccasins, and I can teach you.
A couple of sayings there that are worth remembering. Congressman Paul Gosar, thank you very much for your time and your input.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you.
Dr. Starzl received his doctoral degree in language and information technologies from the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. In addition to his research at CMU, Dr. Starzl develops and teaches classes on the topics of big data, biotechnology, and advanced software development. Prior to his academic work, Dr. Starzl has held senior positions at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and United Therapeutics Corporation. He has also participated in the founding, growth, and sale of several biotechnology and high-tech startups. Recently, Dr. Starzl became the executive director for the American BioDefense Institute and CEO of Starzl Research, the holding company for a portfolio of biotech ventures. Ravi, thank you for joining us. Always good to see you.
Thank you.
Before we talk about the Institute, let's talk about the Starzl family. Your grandfather did a lot of groundbreaking work. Could you tell us more about him and the rest of your family?
Well, it's a good legacy to have. My grandfather, Dr. Tom Starzl, did the first liver transplant. He's broadly regarded as the father of modern organ transplantation. And in addition to the surgical techniques he developed there, he went way beyond that to develop a lot of the immunologic methods necessary to manage rejection and make sure that the organ is accepted by the host. Many have regarded that endeavor as the space program of medicine, which I didn't make that up, but it is a wonderful phrase to be able to repeat. We really kind of took that along with the family genes. Tim Starzl, my father, has done many startups in biotechnology, has made a lot of important contributions, including a novel method for treating pediatric diarrhea that is in broad use today. And today we're trying to do something important to help gain more information and move the ball forward in addressing this COVID-19 pandemic and carry the family legacy forward.
All right, well, let's talk about moving the ball forward then with COVID-19 and the state of the nation's public health system during pandemics. What have you observed over the last several months, and what triggered you to launch the American BioDefense Institute?
Well, there's been a lack of solid information, a lack of solid signaling, and this is something that I think a lot of people have commented on ad nauseum, really. But what really has not been present to a shocking level is solid vetted information. Information that is both vetted for scientific rigor and for practicality and in terms of its application. What we were hoping to accomplish with the American BioDefense Institute is the ability to advise people who are in positions of, you could call it influence, or people who have the capacity to affect the direction of core public health programs, to be able to give them additional scientific data, to give them practical suggestions, to give them things that are scientifically rigorous, but also implementable and actionable in their form. So the hope of American BioDefense Institute, in a nutshell, is to be able to more effectively coordinate and more effectively advise in a response on not just something like COVID-19, but future potential pandemics or future potential biodefense and health problems.
Well, in doing that, you've discussed this 4-point model. Tell us what that is and how it would affect the future of taking on pandemics.
Well, unfortunately, the de facto way in which modern public health is dealing with pandemics or has dealt with outbreaks in the past is you're pretty much restricted or limited to being able to try to take care of yourself and then wait for a vaccine. The whole concept of social distancing, the whole concept of contact tracing is an intermediate measure that is literally just an emergency attempt to quench or halt the spread of a virus through a population that doesn't have any pre-existing herd immunity or population level defenses. And that's not a great position to be in. It's unfortunately trying to hide from the virus, as we've seen, is only so effective, and it doesn't really work for long periods of time for anybody. It doesn't work for the individuals affected by it. It doesn't work for the economy, and the virus still is working its way through the population while we are literally just waiting for a vaccine. So what we're hoping to accomplish is to put a little bit more nuance, to put a few more options on the table. Obviously, getting enough sleep, getting good vitamins, getting good nutrition, this is necessary to help an individual become more resistant to infection. You just get sick less frequently if you follow those types of recommendations. But beyond good personal care, what really should be on the table is a rapid response intervention, some type of biologically active method of intervening in the spread of the disease that is not a vaccine, that can be rapidly deployed within 30 to 60 days of the detection of a novel strain of a virus or infectious agent. And that can be mass produced at an affordable level that does not really carry with it any healthcare access or health access inequities. And this is something that's well within the technology scope of the current world. There are many ways to accomplish this type of approach. This passive immunity is one example of an excellent way to intervene. As the Congressman said, putting a fire break in place. Many people are familiar with the concept of a wildfire, unfortunately, because of the experience of California and other states. As the wildfire is spreading, you need a fire break to interrupt the spread of that fire. The same basic concept applies here in public health. You need a fire break to interrupt that wildfire. You also need something to help the people who are critically ill, a rescue drug, some type of thing that if you're on the ventilator, you want whatever you can get to help you get off that ventilator and get well as quickly as possible. And then finally, you do need your vaccines. Vaccines are an essential part of public health. They have been for a long time. They work. And no one is saying you don't need vaccines by any stretch of the imagination. We need the vaccines, but we can't be only waiting for them.
Well, and especially when it comes to affordability, that's something that, while people talk about the possibility of getting a vaccine on the short-term horizon, there's not a lot of discussion about the affordability piece of this.
Well, that's absolutely true. And there's a lot of different interventions available for someone who has an illness. A vaccine itself is a type of intervention. It's generally speaking regarded as an affordable intervention, and the intent, I think, of everyone who's making a vaccine is to keep it affordable. The problem is the vaccines are not universally effective. They won't be the panacea everyone's thinking about when they do arrive. They might be 50% effective. They might have side effects associated with them. And no one is eager to take a vaccine that isn't rigorously proven to be safe. And so, there are many challenges associated with a vaccine. There was a study recently published around the cost associated with antibody therapies. So another intervention in the COVID-19 pandemic is convalescent plasma or monoclonal antibodies. And a study was recently published that showed the average cost for monoclonal antibody therapy to an immunologic condition is about $55,000 per year, which is way out of range for most people. At $2,500 to $3,500 per treatment, some kind of monoclonal antibody injection is just not going to be practical as a preventive measure, broad scale, or accessible to many people. So we still need to find additional ways to rapidly intervene and quench the spread of the virus. Those are great options. Antibodies are an excellent rescue. Vaccines are a necessary part of building herd immunity, but we still have this hole in the rapid response firebreak approach.
And clearly you've given a lot of thought to these issues and the future of taking on these issues. How has your training as a systems scientist influenced how you view this global crisis that we're in right now? And would you describe ABI's work as more tactical or strategic?
That's a great question. And I would say your strategy is not very useful without some good tactics, and great tactics aren't very useful without some good strategy behind them. You really need both of these approaches. ABI needs to take a longer view. COVID-19 is having a dramatic effect on our world today, but it is not the last pandemic we will face. and the future pandemics and future biosecurity threats may not have the same characteristics that COVID-19 has. So we need to be able to think in a broader spectrum about not just what's happening today, but about what is happening today can teach us about the kind of threats that we'll be facing in the future. But of course, the tactical side of things is extremely important as well. We need to be able to provide actionable information, actionable suggestions to decision makers, to lawmakers, to heads of federal agencies, to frontline workers, things that people can do to actually keep themselves safe and to help other people in a more effective fashion. If ABI is able to reduce collective human suffering while also accelerating the rate at which we overcome these kind of challenges, then it has done its mission extremely well. And I'd say that my training as a systems scientist really is extremely relevant because it allows me to bring a vision of scientific rigor to the process. We are not interested in politically convenient solutions. We're interested in solutions that work for everyone, that keep people safe, and that actually have a practical impact on moving things forward in an agenda-free fashion.
That's good to hear. I think, if you look at how this pandemic unfolded, a lot of people have said that, part of the issue here is that prior to the pandemic, there was a lack of imagination of how you prevent the next one from happening. How important is it, and you've sort of talked about this a little bit, but how important is it to really think big, so to speak, in how bad some of these pandemics could be down the road?
Well, of course, we're affected by the things that we have a hard time imagining how they could affect us by, for the very reason that we're not on guard for the ways in which they impact us. We were not prepared for an aerosolized pandemic in the way that COVID-19. COVID-19 is an agent that has a relatively long incubation period and is relatively transmissible by aerosolization. We had not dealt with things like this recently as a nation, and so we weren't on guard against it, and none of our social practices were ready for it. Something like Ebola, which was a more recent outbreak, really spread by fluid contact, and so there was a lot of measures and guards in place for being able to handle something like that. I think one of the core messages here is that, unfortunately, the way in which novel threats will present themselves are almost by definition outside the scope of your existing defense measures. Otherwise, your existing defense measures would actually be handling them fairly well if they were properly designed. So you have to be thinking outside the box. You have to be trying to keep being one step ahead of the sheriff, as it were, in order to be effective in your prevention efforts. And that's really part of our mission, part of our goal. I don't think that the information is not out there. I do think that there is enough information about the nature of these biodefense threats to be able to anticipate what is coming down the road, but you need concise, actionable information in order to do something about it. Our system is not well designed to have lengthy, contemplative, open-ended questions in the public discourse. What needs to be present is some fairly concrete, actionable steps. I wish I could give the appropriate credit to this phrase, but Mother Nature is the ultimate bioterrorist. It is going to find, and I heard that on a news program recently, Mother Nature is going to find its way around what you have thought to defend against. And so that is what ABI's fundamental mission is to stay one step ahead of that evolving arms race in biodefense.
Ravi, I always enjoy talking to you about these issues because your knowledge of this kind of science is so vast. Why don't you stand by as we bring in the other panelists?
Great, thank you.
John Barry is the CEO of Barry Law. Whether he is supporting veterans or defending constitutional rights, John is always mission focused. He served in Bosnia as part of Operation Joint Force and as a company commander in Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He finished his military career serving over 20 years in the active U.S. Army and the National Guard. Marques Colston went from 7th round draft pick to Super Bowl champion and is currently the New Orleans Saints all-time leading wide receiver, and he ranks in the NFL's top 40 all-time for touchdown receptions. He was recently inducted into the New Orleans Saints Hall of Fame. Since retiring from the NFL, Colston has been involved in over a dozen businesses, has become a recognized business growth expert, sharing his insights on such platforms as CNBC, Fox Business, and in several magazines as well. He helped Columbia Business School design and launch its first executive education program for current and retired football players. JiNan Glasgow George is recognized worldwide for expertise in intellectual property. She has spoken about intellectual property in front of the UN Economic Commission for Europe and has been featured as a speaker at IP conferences on 4 continents. She has a track record of helping companies increase their valuation through developing an IP strategy that really helps them, quote, own their zone. JiNan is also the founder of Magic Number, which is the world's leading patent forecasting technology. JiNan's clientele has included the likes of Apple, Microsoft, NASA, and Visa. Okay, so I want to start with John. John, a lot of Americans haven't followed some of the subtle changes with the legal system. Can you talk about recent changes to the legal system and what impact, if any, it has had on the constitutional rights of Americans?
Absolutely. I mean, when the courts close down, it affects our rights. People go to the courts to get justice. Now, the courts have worked around that in some ways. We've heard about Zoom jury trials. A lot of courts are handling hearings via Zoom, but it's not the same. And we've already run into several issues. Someone charged with a crime has a right to a speedy and public trial. The right to a speedy trial has taken a big hit here. If you think about the logistics involved in trying a case, getting witnesses to the courthouse, and when courthouses are shut down, none of this is happening. So the right to a speedy trial is a big deal for a defendant, especially if that defendant is going to put on an affirmative defense. If they're going to call witnesses, those witnesses can disappear. They can forget things. Evidence can disappear. For a criminal defendant, a speedy trial is extremely important. But so is the right to have a public trial. I have a hearing tomorrow. A client that is going to trial wants to have family and supporters in the courtroom, but we can't do it because this specific jurisdiction has said, no, we're not going to allow friends and family members, only one witness at a time, only the judge, only the jury. And so they're denied that right. But if we look even deeper, right, to the right to confront our accusers, it's a lot easier to accuse someone of something via Zoom. Look at us here, right? You could say something to me and it probably wouldn't feel as, you wouldn't be as nervous about it. But in person, where there are 12 jurors sitting there, a judge, a prosecutor, and the accused, having to face that accuser and having to face cross-examination while you are physically present. That's a lot different than doing it via Zoom. And one of the bigger issues that's come up, especially in the criminal defense arena, is the right to effective assistance of counsel. Before COVID, it wasn't uncommon for defense attorneys to bring in files, if not computers, into the jail to show the accused all the evidence so that the accused could participate in his or her own defense. Well, that has become an issue now, where the accused does not have that same opportunity because jail visits are done. They're happening remotely. Either the lawyer is going to the jail and having a closed circuit TV conference, or it's like this, where they're on Zoom. So yes, constitutional rights are being affected. I think the courts have done a phenomenal job using technology, but it makes a big difference. I'm going to start a jury trial in 3 weeks. The jurors are going to be wearing masks. When I conduct voir dire, right, I need a fair and impartial juror. My client has a constitutional right to that. They're going to be wearing masks. I can't see those facial expressions. As we know, a great deal of communication is nonverbal, and we're not going to be able to see that. Think about when I cross-examine those witnesses. One of the instructions that we give our jurors is that they need to judge these witnesses by their credibility and demeanor of each individual witness. Well, how are they going to judge the credibility and demeanor if the person talking has a mask on? They can't see the facial expressions. They can't see the seriousness. You know, there's an old joke. How do you know if a lawyer is lying? His lips are moving, right? And so we get to the point where we can't even see people's lips moving. And that becomes part of the credibility determination that a jury has to go through. So there's several issues that come up regarding constitutional rights, both in civil and criminal cases, but those are some of the more immediate ones that we've been running into.
Yeah, John, I can't believe you used that joke. I wasn't going to go there, but you brought it up. I spent part of my summer covering George Floyd and Rashad Brooks, and I remember in Atlanta, the DA there in Fulton County telling me, describing the lengths that they were going through to essentially conduct justice because they could not impanel a grand jury because of COVID. And I think a lot of people, to your point, John, don't know the extent to which the court system in this country has been impacted.
Yeah, absolutely. And the courts have done a good job trying to get around it and make things happen. And that's a positive thing. But you're right. If the courts are open, there is no justice. The courts have been slowly opening up using technology in some jurisdictions, and they've done it somewhat successfully. But it changes, like I said, it changes those things. Think about a jury deliberating, right? 12 strangers in a room, social distancing, wearing masks. Are you going to have that aggressive, passionate discourse when they're determining the fate of another human being, when they're all sitting apart, social distance? I don't think it's going to happen. So I think that there are some things that are seriously going to handicap our ability to have fair trials, especially in the criminal justice system, and especially seeing what's going on in our country today. It's more important than ever that people feel they are heard, and the place they are heard is in the courtroom.
And business, JiNan, has certainly been doing that. One of the things that you say is that patent filings are an indicator of market activity. What does your research tell us about American competitiveness during this pandemic?
Sure. Well, patent data isn't just an indicator, it's a leading indicator of market activity. And what we've been seeing in the patent data is inventive solutions. We've been seeing increase in patent filings in the US, anywhere from 100% increase to over 700, 800% increase by technology sector. People are solving problems and filing for exclusive rights with patents. So that gives me great optimism. We certainly have a lot of problems today, and it seems that businesses and individuals are on it. About half of all the filings in the US come from outside. So this is a global contribution to the knowledge base. Patent data is there for everyone to see. I think as Ravi mentioned earlier, there are a lot of areas that need to be addressed. When we look at epidemic and pandemic related solutions, we see solutions in the area of detecting and monitoring, sanitizing, tracking, contact tracing, diagnosis, identification of bioagents, and we also see forecasting, just the data play, companies like IBM investing to really make use of the big data that's available. Of course, treatments and vaccines are other areas that can take longer. So overall, we have positive indicators, and we're glad to see the patent office has been able to adapt to working remotely and being able to provide for electronic filing. So we see that part of our economy not just active, but gaining a little bit more momentum, let's say, during this time of difficulty. Inventors solve problems, right?
Really do, and it's really good to hear the silver lining in all of this. It really is American ingenuity. JiNan.
Yeah, there's a downside too, as John was saying, the fact that courts can't be live and in person. For filing a patent is one thing, but to bring solutions to market, as Ravi was saying earlier, for example, vaccines, but also medical devices, personal protective equipment, to produce things, people need to be together. People need to work together in labs. People need to work together to make prototypes. And so there's a downside too that has a chilling effect, but overall the patent data is showing increased solutions available to draw from.
Talk about solutions. I want to get to Marques. We saw the NBA, Major League baseball, hockey, and every professional and college sport league shut down immediately because of the pandemic. You know, we see the leagues trying to resume their operations. As a former player, can you give us some insight into how they are managing all of this, Marques?
For sure. I mean, I think we have a situation now where there's a ton of people that are just trying to get the facts. You know, there's a lot of really crucial decisions that have to be made across the board. And ultimately, I think everyone wants to create the safest environment possible, because I think collectively and really as a nation, sports and entertainment has always been that thing, you know, that kind of takes people's attention away from hard times. Has always been that linchpin of it's been something that's kind of brought the country together. And you know, with this time of not really having live sport, going into the NFL season, going into college football season, just the thought of not having live sports and entertainment is something that I don't think any of us would have really predicted, you know, sitting here a year ago. So I know there are a lot of smart minds at the table trying to figure out solutions. And, you know, from the player perspective, it's really this balancing act of, you know, understanding the business that has to go on and managing your personal life. You know, I think in a lot of these sports, especially the contact and collision sports like the NFL, you know, there's an element here that when you don't have all the data, you don't have all of the answers, it makes it a very difficult decision to make to go out and put your body at risk, even more than you would playing the game. Potentially because you don't know what you'd be taking home, you know, to your family, to your wife, to your children. You know, so those questions, you know, just around what we're dealing with as this pandemic continues to kind of progress through this country, you know, those question marks, you know, you see them at the ownership level, the management and decision-making levels. You know, trying to figure out how do they salvage their business and how do they, you know, get through this year and you know, hopefully, you know, rebound moving forward. But from a player's perspective, there are a lot of questions and a lot of things to consider, you know, as you're weighing your option on whether or not this is the safest time for you to go out and continue to play the game that you love and get paid to do.
Not only were you successful on the field, but you've built your business off the field as well. You're a business growth expert. What would you advise the entrepreneurs of today trying to adapt to this new environment? What would you tell them to do?
It's new water. It's new territory for everyone. And I think JiNan covered some of the points. You know, I think that whenever you have challenges, there is the opportunity to come up with solutions. And, you know, especially speaking from the athlete perspective, you know, when you look at the big four sports and a lot of the bigger names and the stars that you see, you know, those are a lot of the names that are in the headlines, and a lot of folks, you know, take this approach that, you know, missing a year or, you know, or sitting out a year is not the worst thing in the world. But when you start to peel back the layers of sports and really entrepreneurship, you realize that the majority of folks, you know, that are playing in these leagues, you know, a year away from a game is the difference between having a career and not having a career. You know, so it's no different than a small business owner that, you know, through these hard times, you know, a quarter or three or 4 months of having no revenue that's life and death for your business. You know, so I think that this is a time where again, you're searching for answers, you're searching for data, and at the same time, you're trying to find those avenues and those soft spots to where you can position yourself to do something unique and kind of stay afloat, stay alive, and, you know, ultimately try and create new opportunities coming out of this so that not only can your mainstream business rebound, but you've also created ancillary opportunities for yourself as well.
John, I want to come back to you and talk about the impact this is all having on veterans. You took part in a forum and submitted information to members of Congress about the impact of the coronavirus on the veteran community. What can you share with us about that, about the impact on veterans across this country?
Well, it's very diverse, kind of like the way the court system has been affected. I think it depends on where veterans live. We represent veterans in all 50 states, so we hear quite a bit from our clients about some of the problems that they're facing. But I have a lot of good news. On July 4th, the VA issued a press release, and they talked about this huge backlog of claims. As of February of 2019, they had over 400,000 claims that were in this legacy system. They started a new modernization system. Well, they reported on July 4th, they're on track. They've got through a significant number of those claims, which means veterans are being paid for their disabilities, which is great. So financially, that has been great for our veteran clients. There still have been a lot of issues. If you think back to the beginning of all this, and there was talk about the VA hospitals may be used to treat COVID, and that veterans may not get treatment. That concerned veterans. The other side of the coin is, of course, a lot of our veterans have been exposed to Agent Orange for Vietnam veterans, and then our Operation Iraqi Freedom and our Operation Enduring Freedom were exposed to burn pits. And so a lot of the problems associated with those exposures make them very vulnerable to COVID, and the symptoms of COVID can affect them much, at a much more dangerous level. And so those veterans have voiced a concern about being afraid to go to the VA hospital. They don't want to go to the hospital because they're worried that's where there could be more infection. There was concern about compensation and pension examinations. Would the VA be able to continue to do those? There were a lot of concerns about, and just so I'm clear, I should probably back up. The VA is broken down into the VA Benefits Administration, which pays veterans for their disabilities, GI Bill, stuff like that. And then you have the VA medical centers. And so on one hand, veterans are concerned about their disability benefits. And on the other side, they're concerned about getting the medical treatment. And for a lot of veterans, the concern was going to that hospital environment and whether those hospitals would be functioning. One of my brothers, a former Air Force officer, is now a VA doctor. And I can tell you, he's still going to work. The VA hospitals are open. They are treating veterans. So I think it has gone very well. One of the more difficult things are veterans with mental health issues who feel alone and isolated. Sure, we could do the telework. Sure, you could get on Zoom with a psychiatrist or psychologist, but the technology part with some of our younger veterans, it's easy, but some of our aging population, our Vietnam veterans, it's a little bit more challenging. And so veterans are doing the best they can to get through this. But I think for any individual with a mental health issue, especially post-traumatic stress disorder, sometimes feeling alone and isolated can be a horrible thing. Now, that being said, I deployed a couple of times, and I know plenty of veterans that don't mind it. I mean, we did the hurry up and wait for a long time. People think that these deployments, it's all action, it's all combat. The truth is, there's a lot of waiting around. You're stuck on the base waiting to do something. And so some veterans who don't like crowds, who prefer to socially isolate anyway, really kind of, it hasn't affected them. They can stay at home. They're used to doing in the military, being on lockdown for long periods of time. It hasn't affected them. But I think the greatest thing in the veteran community that we've seen is veterans stepping up to help their communities. I've seen so many great stories of veterans reaching out to provide financial support, to provide food, to provide emotional support, buddy checks. The veteran community not only taking care of fellow veterans, but their entire community. These people that serve in the military, they come back and they're no longer soldiers or Marines. They're called veterans, but they're still heroes. They're just wearing a different uniform. They've got the same sense of duty. The rules are a little bit different, but it is the same commitment to service. And so I've seen veterans step up like never before, and I'm very proud of how the veteran community has responded to this.
It is so important to keep a focus on what is happening during this pandemic to our veterans. We've opened this forum up to those who are seeing this to submit questions, and I have one for you, Ravi. It is from Dennis in Colorado. He is wondering, is there any connection between the pandemics and global warming?
That's an interesting question. I think the data is pretty clear that the reduction in global activity stemming from the lockdowns and stemming from the stay-at-home orders and just the overall lockdown formula has improved the leading indicators for our current global climate crisis, at least in the very, very short term. What that will have impact on the long term still remains to be seen. But I think that's about as much as we can say about the relationship between the pandemic and global change. There isn't enough data yet to actually comment on that further.
Okay, the second question, it comes from Christina in Arizona. How are you preparing your business to be successful if this is the new norm? JiNan.
Well, that's a great question. We have to interact with inventors to truly understand what they've created and developed, but most of our clients already have not been local. So we've done that through the same ways we're communicating now, with video, with phone, sending electronic files. So in some ways, I think we're well adapted. One of the challenges, though, is that we do operate as a team. Initially, we had everyone remote, and over even this summer, we had hired a number of interns, 6 summer interns, and there was some question whether or not to bring them. All were healthy and no issues, and we opted to bring them into the office and train them for doing patent research and analytics. We find the training is better done in person. We distanced. People who wanted to wear masks could do it. Everyone has been healthy, and everyone has been so thankful to be together, to communicate in person. As John was saying earlier, there's nothing like that. I think especially for training and for mentoring, it's far more effective in person. So we're hoping to continue to have the people who are at risk or have children or elderly parents to work remotely. No one has been sick, but to the extent they would, someone would test positive, they would need to stay home. So I think we're prepared to work remotely, but we prefer to have some work in person. And we find that our clients around the US are doing that as well. Again, those who manufacture, those who are creating physical product need to be able to get together. So there are more challenges, but we'll keep on top of the solutions that are being put out for personal protection.
JiNan, Marques talks about teamwork, something that you can identify with. How are you positioning your business going forward in this new environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a much different landscape than it was 3 months ago. And, opportunities like this on Zoom and leveraging different technologies, cloud-based technologies, it allows you to really communicate. I've found out a little bit more efficiently at times. When you're operating within a team setting, sometimes when you have access to people, the communication gets a little comfortable, and there's a little inefficiency that starts to creep in. And just being in this digital and virtual environment has made it, it's kind of it's had a centering effect to where the things that you find most valuable, they kind of seem to rise to the top. And as I'm continuing to position the business moving forward, I'm finding myself wanting to and positioning myself to work with a bunch of with a lot of the athletes right now that are in a really unique situation, whether they be collegiate or professional. They're in a state of instant transition, a lot of them. When you talked earlier about NCAA sports, a lot of them, they had a lot of the winter sports got canceled, spring sports got canceled. Some of the fall sports coming up are being canceled or revisions are made to schedules. So what you're seeing within the NCAA is you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands of college senior athletes that, have put a ton of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears into their sport, and not be able to play out their senior season. And, within that, it takes a transition that, is normally hard to begin with. It makes it that much harder to transition out of life as an athlete and into a workforce that we have no idea what it's going to look like. Unemployment is at record highs. It's a really touchy situation for a lot of these folks that have to transition. And, kind of back to, that conversation around productivity and being able to operate digitally. It just allows for an opportunity to connect with folks and really, share stories and try to help them position themselves, for the unknown that's ahead, and, try and leverage some of the things that made them really unique as athletes into, their next step or their 2.0.
Well, I appreciate all of you sharing your stories. Marques, thank you. JiNan, thank you very much. John, thank you too. Before we go, let's get some final thoughts from Dr. Starzl. Ravi, over to you.
Thanks very much. I think as we get ready to reopen our businesses, or as we look to try to continue the businesses, the points JiNan raised are excellent points. And one of the things that we're looking at in the American BioDefense Institute is what tools are available to help provide confidence in the operation of a business that goes beyond personal protective equipment. Personal protective equipment is very important. There's been numerous studies now published showing the aerosolization, the projectile droplets are all contained to some extent by personal protective equipment. But this really isn't enough to really feel safe and confident in many contexts and many situations. The Tyson meatpacking plants or the Cargill meatpacking plants are excellent examples of situations where once it becomes an endemic problem, it's very hard to control. It's very hard to get back. It's very hard to put the cat back in the bag once it gets into an environment. So there are options that we're working with researchers and working with organizations that are developing novel preventive methods, fire breaks, if you will, that will try to bring some of these options to the table so that frontline workers and essential workers, and those could be healthcare workers, or those could be professional athletes, or those could be meatpacking plant workers, have an option and have some additional layer of defense to help them feel more confident going back to work. And so that's one of the primary missions of ABI, is to try to improve the safety of the workplace by looking for additional tools that aren't on the table right now and bringing them to the table.
Dr. Starzl, thank you. Really appreciate your insight. Thank you to those of you who are tuning in to watch this forum. I'm Jeff Pegues.